Are you up on the latest hot trend in music? Are you into the grunge?
As you probably know, Seattle is now the hottest music city in the country at the moment.
Seattle's rock scene had been bubbling for years. So many bands, such a small city. Then came 1991. First to arrive was Nirvana's Nevermind.
In 14 weeks, they topped the Billboard charts, knocking Michael Jackson down to number 5 and beating out Garth Brooks, Hammer, and U2.
A month later, Pearl Jam released 10. A month after that, Soundgarden followed up with Bad Motorfinger. At the same time, Alice in Chains' Facelift was the first grunge album to go gold. Suddenly, bands from this forgotten corner of America were household names.
And the nation's media have declared Seattle the coolest place in the known universe.
The musical vestiges of the 80s, big-haired heavy metal and big-budget radio pop, were drowned out by a tidal wave of down-tuned power chords and snarling vocals.
Our next guests are a Seattle band. This right here is their newest album.
Where else can you get the Seattle sound? Best Buy.
Looking back on it, the grunge boom was a collision of substance and hype, irony and profit motive. In a pre-internet world where monoculture still brought massive audiences together, grunge reached a kind of cultural supremacy that has rarely been matched since.
Grunge is the fashion trend launched by the hard-driving guitar music known as the Seattle sound. The grunge look is an urban lumberjack, anything-goes ensemble of duck boots, tattered shirts, and long underwear.
I could go on and on about the details of grunge, the fashionable anti-fashion, the tension between cynicism and sincerity in the music, the mega-budget commodification of alternative culture. With all its contradictions, grunge would define a generation of millions. Suffice to say, the early 90s were a confusing time. Most confusing of all was that the source of this upheaval in youth culture, Seattle's live music scene, was off limits to young people. Authorities used the Teen Dance Ordinance to shut down concerts to people under 18. They were silencing the kids that were making the city famous.
It really felt like a revolution. The musical growth was extreme, and yet you have these young people not able to access any of it in the most extreme way.
Where the rest of the world saw a creative free-for-all, Seattle city politics was forging an anti-youth, anti-artist agenda. The TDO constricted Seattle's music community at the exact moment it was producing the sound the city would be known for forevermore. Why would Seattle go so far to sabotage its own creative class? You gotta ask this guy, the city attorney who looked upon Seattle's supernova moment and saw only chaos.
We are hearing from many people in the city that we really are seeing an increasing level of disorder on our streets.
In this episode, Seattle's musical revolution goes global, while one ambitious politician is hell-bent on killing it. From KUOW in Seattle, I'm Jonathan Zwickle. This is Let the Kids Dance. The contradictions of the grunge boom might be rooted in the word itself. It arguably originated all the way back in 1981 with Mark Arm, lead singer of Green River and Mudhoney. A punk rock newspaper in Seattle asked readers to nominate the city's most overrated band. Mark nominated his own group at the time, Mr. Epp and the Calculations, named after his high school math teacher. According to Mark, they were pure grunge, pure noise, pure shit. The Seattle music scene in the 1980s was like that. Jokey, self-deprecating, self-referential. Bands shared members with other bands, and when they played live, they were playing for friends in other bands. Their band names were in-jokes or self-owns. Cat Butt, Limp Richards, The Puds, The Farts, Malfunction, Dickless. There was way more goofball joy than serious ambition. The next significant use of the G word came in a 1989 issue of Melody Maker, an influential British music magazine. Amid the two-page spread of breathless hype about the Seattle scene is the oh-so-music writerly phrase, minimalist grunge metal. This was the first major press about the city from beyond the city. The article was basically paid for by the owners of Sub Pop Records, the Seattle label most invested in selling Seattle music to the masses. But that didn't matter. The validation from an outsider launched the scene from incestuous to international. Seattle bands had been comfortable in their detachment from the rest of the world. They were just having fun, not trying to ignite a global cultural shift. Suddenly, their weird little scene was fully exposed and in demand. Meanwhile, the Teen Dance Ordinance had split the music community. Before the law was set in 1985, the scene was open to everyone, regardless of age. Now it was cordoned off. The TDO focused on people under 18, but it really affected anyone under 21. With no all-ages venues able to operate in the city, shows happened only at bars. People over 21 had access. Anyone younger was left out in the cold. Megan Jasper was right in the middle of it. Today, she's CEO of Sub Pop. Back then, she was a 20-something transplant fresh from New England, eager to soak in Seattle's rock and roll glory. Okay, yeah, all right, so we're outside the Sub Pop office on 4th Avenue in downtown Seattle. We're just going to buzz in. So producer Matt Martin and I head to Sub Pop World headquarters to talk to Megan. For the last 3 decades, she's advocated tirelessly for all-ages music while making Sub Pop and Seattle synonymous with good indie music. I'm hoping she can help me understand Seattle's particularly schizoid personality. How does this place exist as a creative wellspring and uptight nanny state at the same time? We take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Megan meets us at the reception desk.
Hello.
Her bright crimson hair is parted by thick framed glasses and a giant smile. She starts by giving us a tour of the Sub Pop office.
Should we start at the beginning?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Sub Pop went hybrid post-pandemic. The whole floor is mostly empty of people, but is full of ephemera. The label has operated from this office for the last 20 years. Gold records and tour posters line the hallway walls. Life-size cutouts of rock stars stand around the sales room. In the kitchen, Polaroids of more rock stars. We move through the former stockroom to the bathrooms. Here, Megan pauses.
There's a Nirvana gold record in that bathroom above the urinal. And the reason why that is there is because when Bleach went gold, Sub Pop asked Kurt where he wanted the gold record to go, and Kurt was so not into it prominently being displayed on the wall. So he was like, I don't fucking care, put it in the bathroom. And so we did. We put it in the bathroom. It's always been in the bathroom ever since. So the Nirvana gold.
Megan's whole deal, her earnest enthusiasm, her scathing sense of humor, her general vibe of carefree cool, it reflects the charm of Seattle itself. She arrived here in 1989 as the tour manager for the band Dinosaur Jr. When she was in town, she met the founders of the label, hung out and listened to records with them. When she got back to Massachusetts, she told her friends she was thinking of moving to the Pacific Northwest.
And if you said you were moving to the West Coast, what that meant was LA or San Francisco. What Seattle meant was Bigfoot.
But Megan saw something different, something special.
You come all the way across the country to this like remote, weird city that people didn't think about anywhere else. And you see people losing their fucking minds when the bands are playing. They were going crazy and like dancing and getting hammered and laughing and having fun and filling their glass up with more beer and just acting like the best pack of idiots you could ever imagine. There was something so free and exciting and magnetic about it.
Not surprisingly, her parents didn't understand. They gave their blessing, but couldn't imagine what kind of life she could possibly live in such a backwater. After Megan got to Seattle, she told her dad that she had no idea what was happening in the world because the city didn't have newspapers.
Maybe a week later, I get this massive, heavy box, and it was just a ton of newspapers. So there was this understanding that if you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you probably didn't have access to world news and most information. That's how Seattle was perceived.
Megan started as an intern at Sub Pop in 1989 and eventually transitioned to a paid gig as receptionist.
I felt like I won the fucking lottery. I was so psyched. Every record label was sending A&R people to Sub Pop and to Seattle, and bands were getting signed with blank checks. I mean, it was insane. And there was such a weird spotlight on everything Seattle.
Right as it was, the spotlight failed to illuminate some key truths about what was going on in the city. For instance, the Teen Dance Ordinance was fracturing the music community. But that storyline wasn't news. It was all rock stars all the time. The more brooding, the better. Like the world wanted a wildly exaggerated depiction of this place, and the media forked it over.
Seattle was never what the world thought it was, musically. Ever. It never was. When the Nirvana album broke in 1991 in the summer, and the world descended on Seattle, and every band wanted to be Nirvana, and every club had grunge-like, Nirvana-like, post-grunge clones playing every night, it was never what the world thought it was, because the undercurrent was always the Teen Dance Ordinance.
This is Greg Bennick. He's a keynote speaker, TED talker, and extreme juggler. He's also been the lead singer of a hardcore band called Trial for almost 30 years. Greg moved to Seattle in 1991 to study theater at Cornish College of the Arts. He presumed the city would be open and accessible, like the scene he came from in Connecticut. He quickly learned otherwise.
Upon moving here and seeing that there was no all ages, and then watching the Nirvana furor just erupt in the city, and everyone jumping on board and wanting to be the next Nirvana, and all the while thinking, I could go back to Connecticut and see shows with my friends. I can't see them here. What is this? There's no music scene here. There's only an alcohol and drinking and above scene here. And music is an add-on. You order something to make you intoxicated, and along with that comes access to music. That's not a music community. That's a bar scene. So it was never what the world thought it was. And what the world thought it was a music scene and a music community. It never existed. It just simply wasn't here.
Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, these bands all started in the 80s when their members were in their teens or early 20s. They were only briefly hemmed in by the TDO, and by 91, they graduated to international tours, leaving a fractured music community in their wake. When they played Seattle, they played big rooms to big audiences. Some of them were all ages, many weren't. Small shows had catapulted them to fame. Bands born a few years later were stuck. They either played bar shows that young fans couldn't get into, or they played someplace other than Seattle. Dedicated all-ages places like the Bird and Guerrilla Gardens were the historic incubators that led to the grunge boom. They were long dead. And if a promoter did scrounge up the extra money to pay for the $1 million insurance bond and off-duty cops the TDO required to put on an all-ages show, good to go, right? Wrong.
So the police would show up, or the fire department would show up. No one would ever mention the Teen Dance Ordinance, but they always had these fascinating reasons to shut shows down, and they would come in and say, like, the X in the exit sign wasn't illuminated, the outlets in the wall aren't up to code, therefore the show has to be shut down. And we would talk to the fire department, or we would talk to the police department, and we would implore them, tell us why this show can't continue, given that there's no immediate fire threat. And we were stonewalled constantly, and shows were shut down. But never because of the Teen Dance Ordinance, but always because of the Teen Dance Ordinance.
All-ages shows just weren't worth the risk. The TDO was the law of the land. But the choice to enforce it vigorously was exactly that, a choice, made at the top of the political food chain by the Seattle city attorney. His name was Mark Sidran. Sidran was elected in 1990. His predecessor, Doug Jewett, a very rare Republican in Seattle politics, was the architect of the Teen Dance Ordinance. But Sidran, a conservative Democrat, embraced the law like it was his own. From the outset, Sidran believed it was his right and responsibility as chief prosecutor to manifest his own vision of a livable city. He would do that by pursuing the laws he preferred.
I'm the city prosecutor, so my primary responsibility and span of control has to do with these law enforcement issues. I believe very much that the criminal justice system also has opportunities to basically try to coerce people into doing what may be in their best interest to do.
So just to be clear, Sidran believed his job was to determine his constituents' morals and then force them into conforming. He proposed legislation known as civility laws to criminalize the social ills he thought were nudging Seattle down a dark path. In 1993, Sidran banned sitting on public sidewalks during daytime business hours. It was the first law of its kind in the nation. He went after graffiti, public urination, public drinking, and scary dogs. He allowed cops to ban individuals on site from public parks. he doubled down on a poster ban initially floated by Doug Jewett. Sidran apparently believed posters hung on telephone poles were a blight on the cityscape and a danger to utility workers who might have to climb a pole at some point. But posters on telephone poles were the primary promotional channel for Seattle's music scene. Sidran denied he was attacking the music community specifically, but it certainly appeared that way.
The obsession with the city that the Teen Dance Ordinance and that era was a path of righteousness. There was this sense at the time that there was a mission on the part of the city that had to be fulfilled.
Even in a region full of literal rock stars, Mark Sidran stands out. This is the man The Stranger, Seattle's all-weekly newspaper, put on the cover with the headline, "Experts agree Sidran is Satan." Sidran responded by taking out an ad in the next issue seeking a new executive assistant. The headline, "Wanted, Satan's Little Helper." When posters went up around town advising, "Shoot Sidran in the head," hung illegally of course, he put one on his office wall. The t-shirts that read, "Sidran sucks" and "Sidran hates babies," he bought one of each. With his smirking confidence, patterned baldness, gold-framed glasses, and power suits and ties, he looked more like an alpha tax accountant than the Prince of Darkness. Sidran seemed to relish the hate, or at least take it with a sense of humor. What was going on in this guy's head? We couldn't ask him directly. Sidran declined multiple times to be interviewed for this podcast. But during his tenure in office, he enjoyed holding court before the media. The stories he told are illuminating. Sidran pointed to his early childhood as the source of his law and order proclivity. His dad owned a pharmacy, he explained, and he was robbed several times at gunpoint. He once asked an interviewer at the Seattle Times, "What can you say when your dad comes home and tells you some junkie stuck a gun in his face and made him lie on the floor?" It's a good origin story, worthy of a crusader, a superhero. We did connect over email. Sidran wrote, "Letting the kids dance was never the city's issue. Anyone can understand why kids want to party with adults. Why do some adults want to party with kids?" All these years later, it seems to me that Sidran still mischaracterizes the purpose of all-ages music. If he had actually asked the young people who were affected by the TDO what they wanted, it would 100% not be to party with adults. Young people just wanted safe places to do their own thing. They did not want Mark Sidran at their punk concert. So yeah, this answer misses the mark, and it reinforces Sidran's belief that he was elected as some kind of moral arbiter rather than civil servant.
Under 21 wound up kind of being the most visible targets, but, his real targets were poor people.
This is Sean Nelson, a longtime Seattle musician, writer, and actor. You may know him from the band Harvey Danger, who scored a huge hit in 1997 with the power pop masterpiece Flagpole Sitta.
I'm no political scientist, but anytime a politician says anything about civility or whatever, you can loosely translate that to law and order. It doesn't take a very complex reasoning system to understand that what he's talking about is that unruly behavior is bad for business.
In hindsight, he wonders if Mark Sidran's motivation was just material.
He was the villain. He was John Lithgow in Footloose. He was the guy who was just standing athwart everything that everyone we knew wanted to do, and no one supported the Teen Dance Ordinance who was the kind of person you wanted to spend any time around. There was no defending it from any position other than fiscal.
Music fans and club owners, homeless advocates, and free speech advocates, they were all aligned against Sidran. And then there's this guy, speaking before Seattle City Council in 1999 after being arrested for saying fuck in public.
So this is my open letter to Mark Sidran. You dysfunctional, mentally ill derelict, demon scum, antichrist, spewing worthless, constipated balls of dung from your Funkenwagnall education. You're a liquid-emitting fart.
It goes on like this for 4 minutes.
Friends, Mark Sidran is a plastic toad, a horrible scab-infected abortion, a demonic fascist, a pathetic worm with dogmatic sermons for an industrial cesspool, a space heater filled with human waste and cat hair, a fan of John Tesh, a corporate shill, a floating green turd in the punch bowl of life, and may bright yellow vitamin-fortified piss flow onto the door handle of his holy automobile.
James, your remarks will be part of the record of the hearing.
Sidran served 3 terms from 1990 to 2002. In each election, he ran unopposed, basically winning by default, which is wild. Despite the widespread vocal opposition to his policies, nobody offered an alternative. Maybe he was considered unbeatable, or maybe he was the strong man Seattle secretly wanted. Either way, Sidran and his outsized persona outlasted 2 milquetoast mayors. His civility laws largely determined Seattle's authoritarian slant throughout the entire grunge decade. Sidran legislated as if the barbarian hordes were at the gates. And given the look and sound of grunge, he probably believed they were. The Seattle music community during Sidran's reign was a lot of things, but maybe the best overarching descriptor you could apply was unselfish. You can hear it in the music because the bands making it often shared members, shared houses, shared stages. It's one reason why the music spoke to so many people. Success here wasn't blowing up. It was hanging out, holding on. To casual observers like Sidran, that was not immediately apparent.
When I think of Seattle music and culture in the 90s, there was a real skepticism of any sort of public display of earnestness and sincerity. I think it was often mischaracterized as an absence of concern, mischaracterized as being aloof and just like detached and ironic, when in fact I believe it was a legitimate and necessary response to the culture of kind of false sincerity that stood in for real sincerity. It was in defense of things that mattered.
Where Sean saw a defense of things that mattered, Mark Sidran saw lawlessness, disrespect, incivility. All the problems uglifying his city in one obvious target. The people Megan Jasper called the best pack of idiots you could imagine.
We're talking about culture, which is really the thing that ties us together and holds us together and allows us to actually learn to be more empathetic, caring, thoughtful humans.
Yeah, trying to legislate around culture is definitely a minefield.
You can't sweep it under a rug. It's never going to go there. It won't stay there.
Yeah, especially young people who just are naturally prone to rebel.
Totally, and should be rebelling. Like, that's how we become better, is like we create change.
Change was indeed coming to Seattle's music scene. The city's youth would not be held down. They just had to go to the suburbs to find their freedom. We're inside a 1950s fire station turned YMCA turned concert venue. This is a weird place to see a show, let alone play one. But Jawbreaker isn't your average punk band, and the old firehouse isn't your average concert venue. In 1994, it's an unlikely all-ages rock and roll paradise. This is how much the Teen Dance Ordinance warped the musical landscape. Up-and-coming bands that courted the area's teens were forced to go outside the city for legal gigs. To Redmond, Washington, most famous as the home of a little tech company called Microsoft. Jawbreaker came together as teenagers. Now the band members are all in their mid-20s, and they make a point of performing to young audiences. Tonight, Jawbreaker is playing their hearts out. The crowd is going bananas. Rocky Vodolato was there. So what was that show like?
It was life-changing. That was one of those key moments in my life where I was like, oh, I know I want to be a musician. Like, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to do what that band is doing. Kind of gave my life purpose.
Back then, Rocky was 15. Today, he's a veteran singer-songwriter and a fixture of the Northwest music scene. He spent years of his life at the Firehouse seeing hardcore punk and rock shows, and later playing plenty of them himself.
I just went to everything. That's how it was. Me, Ben Gibbard, Dan Gallucci, he was in Modest Mouse and Murder City Devils, and you'd run into everybody at the shows. Everybody was just always there.
The old Firehouse Teen Center is a crucial part of the Seattle music story, despite not actually being in Seattle. This place not only hosted the touring acts who cared about their young audiences, it also launched the next generation of Northwest bands.
It included folks who went on to be in the Murder City Devils, Pretty Girls Make Graves, Modest Mouse. They were all there at the beginning. Later, Blood Brothers came out of the old Firehouse. Botch played early shows, very early shows, at the old Firehouse.
This is Kate Becker. She opened the Firehouse in 1992 and ran it for the next 9 years. Today, Kate works alongside the King County Executive as the Creative Economy and Recovery Director. And she remains an advocate for all-ages music. Maybe because of her grassroots origins, she has no trouble keeping her street cred while working within the highest spheres of public power. Kate set out on this path early in life. She grew up in New England, where she got a fake ID, not to buy booze, but to go to shows. She was kicked out of every high school in her hometown for skipping class or causing trouble, so she started college at 16. But her real education came from putting on shows.
I never fashioned myself a promoter or a show producer. It was just a matter of making things happen for the musicians around us and providing a good time.
Kate moved to Seattle in that breakout year of 1991. She came with her boyfriend. He went back east, and she stayed. She took a job advertised by the office of the mayor of Redmond for a youth organizer, a job that appealed to her do-it-yourself sensibility.
We didn't have many coffee shops in Redmond at the time, but we had parking lots and 7-Elevens and places where large groups of young people gathered. And I would go talk to those groups of young people and say, "What do you want?" They'd say, "We just want to play shows." Really? Yes, really. So there was this whole underground scene that was brewing in garages and places in Redmond.
The kids just wanted to play shows. At the time, the city of Redmond was using a decommissioned 1950s fire station as a YMCA. In late 1992, Kate convinced the folks at the Y to let her put on a show with a few local bands.
After a year, the Y left, and we took over the building and turned it into a full-blown center for young people, at which point we painted the showroom walls black and turned it into an art gallery and a silkscreen studio. We later built a media lab with a film production and music recording space.
Kate kept the rules at the Firehouse to a minimum. Everyone is welcome. Respect each other. And if you want to perform, you got to join Band Pool, which meant attending meetings that brought fledgling musicians together to decide who got to play when. Of course, Band Pool was secretly a form of youth leadership training, building skills around collaboration, consensus building, planning, organizing, and promotion. But Kate didn't tell anyone that. Just as importantly, Band Pool was a way for young people to see and hear each other's music, and through that process, create a sound all their own. Cody Willis, the drummer from Murder City Devils, remembers how hard he and other musicians worked to separate themselves from mainstream grunge.
They were definitely trying to do their own thing and make their own thing happen that was separate and different from everything else that was going on in the time. I don't know if it was a reaction to what was going on at the time or if it was just something, them trying to carve out their own identity and have something for themselves.
The community they empowered magnetized hundreds and hundreds of teens from across the region.
I realized lots of these young people are not from Redmond. They're coming over from Seattle. Why are we getting such a huge draw of young people coming from Seattle when it wasn't as easy to get to Redmond in 1992 as it is now, right? So it became aware that all these young people were coming over and started talking to them and realized because there aren't shows in Seattle for people under 21. How could this possibly be? We were the international mecca of music by that time, right? Everybody knew Seattle was blowing up with music. But if you were under 21, there was very few places you could go.
Melly Darby was 13 when she saw her first show at the Firehouse. She lied about her age, claiming she was the requisite 14 to get in. Up until that moment, Melly had a hard time as a kid. She'd been pulled out of middle school because she was bullied so badly. It wasn't easy for Melly to convince her mom that she was old enough to go to the Firehouse by herself.
And my mom was like, "That's a no. I think I threw a fit until she finally agreed to let me go to the next one. So it was the second show ever held at the old firehouse.
Wow.
And she dropped me off, and she sat outside in her car with a book for 3 or 4 hours while I was in the show with Alex and some other mutual friends from school. And I do recall, she said, I dropped off one person, and then the gal who came back to the car, I was ecstatic. She was like, you were a different person. And that was it. I think I was there from that point on every single week, every single weekend.
Melly became Kate's #1 volunteer, throwing herself into every aspect of running the place. Melly and other teens like her took tickets, ran lights, sold concessions. She was there for every show, arriving early to set up and staying late to clean. She was committed in a way that only a young person catching their lifeline can be. As an adult, Melly would go on to launch her own music production company. She's put on countless concerts at venues across the city and helped elevate Seattle's hip-hop community to national status. She's part of a pipeline that starts with young music lovers feeling comfortable among their peers.
We knew, somehow just instinctively knew, that the best way to ensure a safe scene was to have it be run by the people who cared about it most, right?
The firehouse community defied the top-down rulemaking going on across the lake in Seattle. Collective buy-in fueled an energy that was just bonkers. The massive mosh pits and frequent crowd surfing were self-regulated. Kids knew to take care of each other and make sure everyone was having fun. Occasionally, Kate had to downshift a particularly excited crowd, but mostly the bands and fans figured it out for themselves.
We had a bikini kill show going on at the old firehouse, and suddenly in this pretty aggressive pit, all these young women just came forward and sat down on the floor in the middle of a really going off pit, right? They just took over the whole space, and it suddenly went from having this pit that was really aggressive and maybe fueled by young men to now we have a sitting audience in the front of the show.
Kids running the show. Girls running the mosh pit. What we're talking about here is an alternative power structure known as DIY. That's do it yourself. In this context, it's not about retiling your bathroom. It's about planning and producing concerts outside the bounds of the concert industry. DIY adheres to a particular ethos, anti-corporate, anti-capitalist, and a particular musical aesthetic. Hard, fast, loud, and aggressive. The idea wasn't born at the firehouse, but it was totally embodied there. For some bands, this youth-first DIY spirit was a draw in and of itself. That's why this offbeat venue in a suburb was able to offer such a killer roster of musical talent. Bikini Kill and Gossip, both from Olympia, played early shows there. So did Death Cab for Cutie, Fleet Foxes, and Sunny Day Real Estate. Fugazi, Sublime, and Elliott Smith all performed at the old firehouse, sometimes skipping Seattle entirely. This is the scene that Greg Bennick was looking for when he got to Seattle. He just had to go to Redmond to find it.
The music community was something that we created. It was something for us to maintain. It was something of value that we wanted to perpetuate and make sure was safe for us and for other people. And we held on to the idea as valuable that the music community that we were a part of, that we were helping to create, had real value for people. And that's what we were trying to maintain.
You could feel like you were in the right place at the right time, that you were a part of something special, that you were a part of something that mattered. And everybody there was an outsider. Nobody was the norm. And I think that that was like the first place that I felt accepted, that I felt seen.
Were you aware of the TDO at that point?
Absolutely, I was. Kate and other staff, they would be up on the microphone during shows or before shows, at the end of the shows. They would talk a lot about the mission, on why they were there. They would talk about the TDO. They would talk about the importance of creating safe spaces for youth.
The more Kate learned about the TDO, the more she wanted to do something about it. She went into serious organizer mode.
Well, even if there were sordid and dark things happening at the monastery, who should be responsible for that? The promoter of the club or the young people of Seattle? To me, it seems so black and white that you hold the people who are doing things that you think may be illegal or inappropriate or not suited for young people, hold them accountable. But why hold the young people of Seattle accountable? So it seemed to me from the get-go that this law was entirely backwards and had to be changed. I don't know how they could be so blind to that. Were they not once 15?
The Firehouse became an unlikely landmark. It offered a template for what the all-ages music community can achieve when it's nurtured rather than smothered. A safe space before that was even a thing. It spawned other teen centers in neighboring towns that also hosted all-ages shows. Kate and Greg would soon start using the place as a home base to organize a youth political movement to repeal the TDO. They'd reorient resistance away from street brawls and towards City Hall. But that shift was still a few years off. In the meantime, while young people were flocking to the suburbs for rock and roll, a brand new musical style was taking off in Seattle. And the police were paying attention. Next time, cops weaponized the Teen Dance Ordinance against the city's budding hip-hop scene.
It was a form of extortion, if you ask me. It was like, you either pay us or you can't do it. And so that's how it was going down.
The TDO takes an insidious new twist. I'm Jonathan Zwickel, and this is Let the Kids Dance. Let the Kids Dance is a production of KUOW in Seattle. We're a member of the NPR Network, a coalition of independent, listener-supported public media podcasts. Let the Kids Dance is created and written by me, Jonathan Zwickel. Matt Martin produced the show. Jim Gates is our editor. Final mixing by Hans Tweit. Original music is by Ryan Devlin and Kim West of Smoky Brights and Mega Cat. Our theme song is by the Four Slicks covering Bo Diddley. CM Ruiz designed our logo. Our production team includes Marshall Eisen, Michaela Giannotti-Boyle, Marian Muhammad, Brendan Sweeney, and Lauren Vespoli. Want to hear more awesome music from the TDO era? Dive into the Let the Kids Dance playlist. Check out the link in our show notes or search LTKD on Spotify. Hey listeners, do you like going to all-ages shows? Did you when you were younger? Did you live through the Teen Dance Ordinance in Seattle? Or were you part of an all-ages scene somewhere else? Tell us about it. Record a voice message on your phone and email it to dance@kuow.org. Thanks for listening.